Right. Thank you, Sayed. And I'll also like to acknowledge all the participants here, and particularly our friends from Frederick Naumann Foundation, Brigitte and Anika. Thank you always for being here and supporting such discussions. So I'll start, I think, straight away into the analysis, and then we will have more comments to follow. So first of all, what I thought that, there could be various ways of looking at the budget, right? So essentially, we are looking at the tax policy, but we are also looking at the expenditure policy. Although a couple of days ago on a TV station, on a TV channel, I said that there is actually no tax policy, but for the lack of a better word, so we use sometimes tax measures. So we are looking at we're going to look at the tax measures, and then going to look at the expenditure allocation, and see what insights can we collect, not just from this side of the table, but across this house. Good things first. These are all the quotations from the speech which the finance minister made. And so all the right kind of sound bites. I was, if I were not to look at the actual budget itself, I would be a very happy person, right? My most favorite remark from his speech was, though, government needs to move from the state-oriented economy to a market-driven economy, right? So he was almost speaking as what Prime has been saying all day long, and in fact, all of you have been saying similar things. And so we will all be happy to see the reflection of that statement into the budget itself, right? Look at, so this is the reducing. So Pied has been saying reduction of government footprint. And so I think he probably picked up the headlines from all our research, right? So जो सारी हेडलाइंस आई है वहीं से आई हैं जो हम लोगों ने इतने सालों से रिसर्च की हैं, और ये सारी बातें बिल्कुल ठीक हैं. Who would disagree with all these points, right? So priorities for the budget. Okay, but then we move. थोड़ा सा हम आगे चलते हैं, थोड़ा realistic उसमें चले जाते हैं. So this is you probably have caught up with the news just earlier this week. Pied Prime Tax Reforms Commission, which was set up recently, launched a very detailed report, and these parameters on the left side of this table are from that presentation. And Dr. Manzoor and Dr. Mahmood have extensively participated in that in the discussions. And so in an ideal sort of, if there was a tax policy, the tax policy should have these features. Uniformity of tax rates means that irrespective of the source of income, we should look at the same rate of taxation. But in reality, what we see in the budget, that the discrimination across tax bases within the income tax, within the general sales tax, continues to exist. Then we would have liked reduction in the rates. But if you look at the effective personal income tax rates, salaries, they have been increased. Although the top marginal income tax stays the same, but the effective salary tax has been increased. Also, we have, government has been talking about like broadening of GST base, but then in many measures, actually, we have seen an increase in the GST. And that is going to perhaps further move towards undocumentation of the economy, contrary to the objective, contrary to the priorities which I mentioned. Then free of distortions, Dr. Manzoor will say a lot more, so I will not say much here. But we continue to see the custom duties are with a lot of distortions. And then exemptions, we'll hear, I think, more details on exemptions a bit later. But according to the economic survey, we had 3.9 trillion rupees of exemptions. Ad hoc measures, sectoral orientation. So, for instance, one of the sector might be identified, scrap steel, okay, we will reduce the sales tax rate. Okay, so why that sector? It's a good measure, but then why not others? So it's like pick and choose continues to happen, which means that it's an opening ground for business lobbies to come to Q Block and bargain for their interests. So in an earlier article which I wrote, I have argued that this is not a helpful approach. We should have, in sector neutral budget. So budget should be balanced. Budget should be sector neutral. Government should not be picking and chooses which sector to get what kind of favors. Then complexity. Of course, we would want less complexity, but and we were, and not just we, many people have argued that this filer non-filer discrimination is counterproductive in all means. But now we hear third category, which is like so. And digitization, yeah, the intent is there, but there is no clear measure of how to do it. So on all these grounds, I'm afraid that the current tax approach is faulty and short-term, ad hoc in nature. This is just a snapshot, so I'll skip that. So expenditure, is there any change from last few years in terms of expenditure allocation? I'm afraid not. This is not a news. So this is the greater chunk is still the interest payment, followed by defense, followed by grants and transfer, subsidies, pension. And so 57% is for interest payments, debt servicing. I'd like to acknowledge Khalid Khalilullah, who has been writing a lot. I'm sure we'll hear from him in this discussion session. What are the harms of this approach? And then we have civil government, which is getting about 839 billion rupees out of the whole allocation of the current expenditure of 17 trillion rupees. So, and so that's where the problem lies. And the defense is almost getting twice as the civilian government. And then there are subsidies continue to be there. So there's no change as far as I'm concerned. This is further elaboration of the change, if you like to say. So there's a last column measures the change from the previous budget, revised budget, and this year budget. So if you see, revenue receipts are projected to be 40% up, which is a very ambitious target, because especially I think the inflation is going down, and I don't know how they have calculated that. Non-tax revenue is phenomenally increased for 64%. And then provincial surplus is more than doubled, like in this budget. And also look at this power sector subsidies. They've also doubled. So it means that while we have been talking about IMF framework, some of the very basic fundamentals of IMF framework have also been violated in that respect. If it was the case, then I would not have seen doubling of power sector subsidies in a budget. So these are all the indications of where things are going in terms of the budget, and in terms of the approach to the budget itself. Then a further deep down on the revenue, where the government is going to collect the revenue. This is the income tax side, capital value tax, custom duties, sales tax, and federal excise duty. So in the presentation which we gave earlier, we have proposed measures on how we can actually rely more on general sales tax when we want to increase the revenue as opposed to custom duties. But those recommendations have been ignored, and we continue to rely on sales tax, on the custom duty and the sales tax which is collected on the custom duty itself. And then what surprised me the most was here the non-revenue items, about 4,800 billion, and the State Bank of Pakistan profit. So this has 157% more than this year. So the government is anticipating significant amount of money from the SBP profit, also petroleum levies and markups as also there to dividends. So all in all, you see there are these trends which are suggestive that some of these revenue estimates may have been totally off the line when it comes to realism, and they are not going to help. They're not going to help in terms of the base, the tax base. I'm afraid that this is further going to complicate our problem of the tax structure. And the fiscal deficit, although it is proposed to be reduced here, this is the fiscal deficit which is projected, 5.9. But even last year, it shot up significantly from budgeted. So this will further go up as we move into the fiscal year. So these are the major, I think, issues with the budget when it comes to the budget allocation. But I'd like to hear more from our worthy panelists, and I'd like to request Dr. Manzoor to follow up.
All right. So we have three economists in the panel, and they can give you a much better overall picture. I think Ali has already done the big thing, but I think better if I focus on one of the points, and that's my strong point: international trade and about customs. Unfortunately, I thought that our government would have realized that a moment has come to change the policies. And for example, we had, similar moments when at one time Vietnam leadership sat together, they said, what's wrong? They said, we have to improve our exports and do more and open up our economy and do that. In 1986. And with that singular focus, they went on, and here they are. Then subsequently, China already did in 1980, then 5 years later, India came in, and so on, every country. 4 or 5 years later, they looked at another country, they followed. So we have been dithering, sometimes saying, okay, we'll go on export-led growth, 1 year, 2 years, then we reverse. But this year, strangely enough, giving the highlights of the budget, they say we will go for import substitution. That was the mantra in the 1980s and the last part of the 20th century. Although people talk about homegrown, etc., but homegrown doesn't mean that we will reverse all our policy and go what others were doing 150 years ago or 100 years ago or 200 years ago. There's a lot of saying that, the Americans did this 300 years ago and British did this 200 years ago. But we don't have to go that far back and now try to do those policies. We should look at our neighbors and others, what they did in the recent past. And so with this theme, they have reversed lots of reforms that were done early. I'll give you a few examples. First, when Ali was giving those points, the themes, the word export was missing there. We don't realize is that maybe we think it's Ministry of Commerce, etc., but our main trade policy instrument, it's not I'm saying, when the WTO does this trade policy review of Pakistan, they say your main trade policy instrument is your customs tariff. It's through customs tariff that you, stop something coming in, or you put so much taxes that this raw material cannot come in, or you just, whatever, but the main trade policy is your customs tariff. Now, what they have done in this budget, just a few examples. I've not been able to read all the things. First, the whole world is now moving towards these electric vehicles. You see all this, and internal combustion engine is almost giving way to this, and maybe it will take a few years. But the way China already realized, 20 years ago, but 2010, others were thinking, is it going to be a success or not? China just started going. And now where is China? And where is the rest of the world? US and EU combined together, they're the powerhouses producing cars. China has overtaken them single-handedly in producing it. And in exports, they're, I wouldn't like to give you a wrong number. But anyway, so you just heard 2 weeks ago, President Biden putting so many duties, 100% duty on import of electric vehicles from China. Europeans are just doing it. I think they just did it. Perhaps 30% duty. Others, because this is the whole world. And I just wrote an article last week, and I said, one good opportunity. We always missed on auto industry we started one of the earliest, 1949. But Pakistan just didn't have anything to eat, but auto industry was one of the first one. 54, they were already well ahead. But they kind of got stuck about this import substitution, high tariffs, protectionism, and strange and micromanagement by, we have chairman of the EDB here, micromanaging how much they import, how NFBR, and this and that policies and this thing. And we are where we were, say, even 20 years ago. I was in Geneva then, and where there was a lot of discussion about the next phase of auto industry because they were changing the international policies and import substitution, etc. Well, WTO said this is not legal and this destroys trade and you have to change. Now, many developing countries were extremely worried. India, Indonesia, Turkey, all of us. So I was also going around in that lobbying, and this is I remember Indonesian investors saying, "Oh, but we did a private study, and I think we are not on the right track. We have to move out of it." And others, so these countries were taken to this dispute settlement because they didn't want to change, and India lost and Indonesia lost, and so they had to change their policies to open up their auto industry. So I was asked to get us a little 4 or 5 years more. In the meantime, we are doing these changes. But what we did was we cleverly, instead of regulation, we did it through tariffs, and we kept the same policy. At the time, Indonesia was producing 200,000 vehicles. We were doing the same. Now, Indonesia is producing 1.5 million. About 4 to 5 billion are exported. And this year, our production was from 200,000, it had come down to 100,000. And I can give you these stories from many other countries, how engineering goods, auto parts, etc. became. Now there is a chance to do this thing with electric vehicles. We have good base for maybe electric vehicle will be very difficult for us to. We announced our new policy 5 years ago, but not a single investor showed interest in putting here because of our policy, deletion policies and inward-looking policies. Because this electric vehicle assembly plant is quite expensive, so unless you can export, they don't want it for domestic market. And we have no export interest. In fact, recently our government asked these big three, Indus Motors and Honda and this thing, that at least a part of your percentage should export. And they turned back and they said, who are you asking this? This is illegal. They just were very blunt. And I thought government would do something, would kind of give them some more competition. Instead, what the government says in this budget document, that we are increasing duties and whatever concession we gave on these electric vehicles, etc., with the previous government, PTI government, that is being withdrawn. So that's one thing. Then this thing happens all over. The next thing I look at is paper, because paper Pakistan considers is one of the most luxury products, and we shouldn't have to see any paper. We shouldn't read it because they have the highest duty, they have the highest sales tax, they have the additional duty, etc. And what they do in this budget is they increase more duty. It used to be this. The paper used to be similar in India, but then they realized the significance of printing industry, and they started rationalizing duty. Now, this year's India's figures were $35 billion. They had the industry had become worth, and the whole world is coming to India to get their paper. And even Oxford University Press, etc., who were printing their brochures here, now go to Dubai to get them printed because our 70% tariff starts, and so we are at least 70% more. And now in this budget, we have put some more. Similarly, we have done with steel. Similarly, we have done anything. So this thing is that unfortunate, and Ali, you were saying about government picking up. And so all these sectors, and you were saying about these big guys coming to Block Q and FBR. And every one of those big guys, whether it was autos, whether it was steel, whether it was paper, look at anyone. So they all went and got more protection from FBR. And instead of going that thing. So my plea would be, although our document, Pied Prime document came too late, for the budget because it was just a day before. But I wish they would look at it because we have looked at all this very carefully. Mahmood Khalid and his team has done a lot of research work to show that, for example, in customs, there's a feeling ingrained in our FBR and others that if we reduce duty, say on paper from 40 to 20%, we'll lose so much. And his very carefully done research, which he's willing to defend at any forum, that very first year, it's not even the next year, you'll gain so much, next year you'll gain so much, and third year, I don't know, you can give us the figures but later on. But so it's not a lose. And what happens is he's taken into account that most of our, these imports, wherever we put high duties, they go in smuggling. They go in a foreign transit. And government doesn't really get it. So smugglers make some margin, and so we get these things. And, I think I stop here and later on maybe.
Thank you, Manzoor Shah, rightly pointing out that government is earning revenue at the expense of industrial growth. And this is something, the mantra in the government, that how to collect easy revenues. So this is something very alarming. As Ali set the tone and thrown all the jargons, there are some more, Ali. Gender responsive budgeting. And I looked at because I am here, so I have to defend my community. So I tried to see that what is there for the gender. And it was just a jargon there. Another jargon, growth stabilizing. And the numbers which Ali have shown us, 17% growth in GDP in nominal terms, 40% growth in the tax revenue, and 64% growth in non-tax revenue. So, is it a big thing to say that would be growth is not there and the tax would be increasing more burden without increasing the net and without bringing more people into the tax net? How you are going to collect these more taxes? Obviously, the burden is on you and me. Another concern, when you look at the budget policies, incentives, what type of incentives they have used to channelize the income and expenditure. And the old tested ideas of giving some money here, some money there, and government think that they can do everything, and giving some sprinklers is the use of subsidy, the use of taxes, use of indirect taxes. These are the incentive structures which is there in the budget. If you see the budget from the perspective of the policy, what is the methodology of budget making in Pakistan? It's incremental. We all know that from 10% to 5%, 20%, 30% increase, we sent the budget circular to all the departments and asked them, indicate your budget for the next year, and they just try to increase the budget from the previous year's budget. And the alarming thing is not the incremental budget policy. That incremental budgeting is not translating into the growth. It is not translating into the employment. It is not translating into the industrial growth. So what to do? Now they have used gender responsive budgeting. So would it increase the women participation in labor force? Is the incentive there? And while spending the money, would you be looking at from the perspective of the women that how this expenditure is affecting the women? So they are not looking at these things. Another area is governance. Our capacity to forecast the numbers what would be the expected economy in the coming year and how it would going to behave. And since last 20 years, I can say, and I can vouch for it, that our capacity is breaching. We've been deteriorating in translating the forecasting into the trends and the trends into the reality. And every year the revised budgeting shows that we are unable to walk on the set path which was given in the medium-term development framework. And budget became irrelevant the time it's come out, and we have to set the petroleum levy, we have to negotiate gas prices, we have to negotiate various other prices. So it becomes irrelevant the day it passed, and we have to adjust the prices and other incentive mechanisms. So what to do? We all are concerned with the social sector and Pakistan development sector spending, that what we are spending on social sector. And when we look at the PSDP, we have indicated that we are going to spend something like 1 trillion or something is there indicated for the PSDP. And I am sorry that the size of the throw forward is bigger than the PSDP. And most of the PSDP is going to be spent for the previous schemes. And at what cost? We have 9,000 tax revenue, and all of it is going to be spent in the interest payments, and we have to borrow at a commercial rate for this public sector development program. So, we are with the realm of affairs, and we all are with these type of things, what we expect. And then when you look at the media and you hear the speeches in the parliaments, you think that they are not only distant, they are far from the reality, and they don't really know how to change things for better. Manzoor Sahib is talking only one thing, that how they've been using the tax and the tariff structures for getting more money. But if you look at all the sectors, the story remains the same. It will not change. Let's talk about the gender budgeting or talk about the social sector expenditure. With 240 million people, you think that government can facilitate 50% of its population with 582 million rupees, which is allocated for the social sector spending in the BISP, and 65 billion for education, or 7 billion in Punjab for the higher education. So it's something like we really don't know the mathematics. Basic numbers are not correct. And as my husband wrote last year in his last column about the budgets, that it conceals more than it reveals. So budgets are the gimmicks. These are there. And we know, like any good housewife who understands that the whole income is going to be spent for the interest payments, and expecting that now I can have a luxury car and can I have change in the furnitures and having the more expenditure for the public sector officials and the foreign trips, and all these things will not change. So this is the pessimistic situation which we all are aware. We've been repeating ourselves since so many years what to do, how to change. Simple. As Ali suggested the recipe, that market has to come forward and the government has to give the room to the market. Government must admit that they cannot do these things. When the government cannot do these things, so how to finance social financing? We are failed to bring people into the tax net. we are failing as a state that convincing the people that we can provide you social safety nets. We are unable to target the non-filers, even if we are increasing the rate from 5% to 10% to 12%. So we are increasing the transaction cost. So what to do? Simple recipe, simple solution, that social financing has to be done like the guaranteed income scheme, universal health coverage, and universal education policy. These are not the policies in which the government has to finance the insurance companies and the financial sectors. These sectors can provide services, and the government has to play the role of a regulator, facilitator, and enabler for the poor, not for those who can afford to pay. So the first thing, government should pull out from these sectors, and a social financing scheme has to be there, and financing must be from the private sector, not from the public sector, because allocating 65 billion for higher education will not change. Even we will not change anything if we double the financing. There are issues of quality, there are issues of skills, there are issues of so many other things, of administrative and governance things which we have to deal with. So even by doubling the allocation will not change anything. How it will change? It will change only that government has the will and the commitment that this financial sector is making money. We have to set the incentives right. They must come forward and start delivering. And I am not talking something like out of a blue or which has never been experienced. Look at health policy in Thailand. How they have provided universal health. It is not something like the health card is given and then the government is paying to the insurance company for clearing the bills at the hospitals. Government cannot provide these facilities. We have to look at the Thailand's policy. We have to look at the social financing scheme in Vietnam and an universal income guaranteed scheme in Canada and many other countries who've been doing it. And we just need to follow their footsteps. And we have to do incremental changes which can generate growth. Stabilizing growth is nothing. You need a growth for the people which are more than 100,000 people are joining labor force every year?
2 million.
2 million. So 100,000 people are waiting for the skills. Out of 40 million, 2 million are joining the labor force, and we cannot facilitate them. So budget is irrelevant. The day it came out, it passed by the parliament, it can pay salaries, perks, privileges to the 30% of the population who are directly involved with the government or the public sector, and for the rest is nothing. And the rest of the payments are for the interest payments and everything, and we have to keep the ball rolling. Thank you very much.
So that we are all on board in terms of what we are discussing here. So I looked at the budget priorities last year and tried to figure out in terms of the economic survey that whether the priorities which were set at the budget were really met or not. Surprisingly, almost none of the targets which were set qualitatively in the objectives were met. So as Dr. Nadia said, that it appears that the budget is not much of some policy document which can actually guide us that where we are going to land after 1 year. And this is because essentially we have missed the whole exercise perspective, that this is the fiscal policy document which should actually guide us that where we are heading after 3 years, after 5 years, and how our fiscal side is going to support the policies of the government in terms of the financial outlay. So what we missed this year along with the budget was basically the 13th five-year plan, which the government actually started off with, that they're going to present along with the budget, so that we can see retrospectively that what are we trying to achieve down the road and what foundations are laid down. But as Dr. Nadia rightly mentioned, unfortunately, the federal budget has nothing practically to vote or discuss about, because if you look at the type of expenditures which are made, they are mostly charged. So that means practically you don't have any option to switch to some better policy in terms of expenditures at least. So whatever the focus is of the budget, that is primarily on the taxation side. But before going on to that, let me just briefly highlight some of the issues which we have observed in the budget document. For example, Ali mentioned about the tax expenditures, 3.9 trillion rupees. Now, this 3.9 trillion is not actually of the last fiscal year. That's of the fiscal year which was completed. So practically it is going to be 22-23. So if I take the ratio of 3.9 trillion to the revenue collected at that time, that turns out close to be 55%. So that means the revenue which we could have achieved and purposefully not collected is more than half of what we have reported for the fiscal year 22-23. Now the question comes in our mind that what are we trying to achieve from that big an expenditure? The second thing, the unfortunate mantra of tax to GDP ratio being very low basically crumbles down, because if you add back the exemptions which you could have collected, means that your tax to GDP ratio would be 15%. And on top of that, if you take out the agriculture GDP, because practically that sector is not of the FBR's domain, then our tax to GDP ratio of the FBR only touches close to 17% of the non-agriculture GDP. And still we are pressurizing them to collect more for us because of the 18th Amendment and the NFC award, because we have to feed the provincial governments out of this budget. And practically there is no discussion. So you imagine we are discussing the social protection, we are discussing about the education and others, whereas these are practically the provincial subjects. They should be discussed there and then where it actually happens. The second thing about the budget is the underlying structure of the budget, where, as ma'am has rightly mentioned, the concealment of facts. We have got debts which are right at the door of our budgets, but not presented as part of the budget. The contingent liabilities of the public sector enterprises, the circular debts of the power sector and the commodity operations. They're not talked about, but they are slowly creeping in our budget. So if you look at the grants and transfers this year, you would find out that close to 250 billion rupees worth of contingent liabilities has been made part of the budget. So whether you like it or not, for the timing it's out of the budget, but it's sooner or later going to hit us. So it's like a storm in making. And that is actually increasing. Even on the revenue side, one is astonished to see that the government is lending to public sector enterprises, the government is lending to provincial governments, and they're earning back close to 600 billion rupees. So just imagine the government lending to the provincial governments, earning, and then transferring back from the NFC award. So it's like a circular flow of money creation happening within the government departments and the governments across the board. And in all that discussion, what we have missed out, that there was a very good framework which was presented under the name of the Treasury Single Account, in which the money which is pertaining to the government department but parked in the banks, it has been rescinded. Practically, it's no more in place. So if you are borrowing from the banking sector close to 7 trillion, there is close to 5 trillion worth rupees of government money already parked in the banks. And they are basically lending us back from that. So there are many circular flows going on where the money is being provided to a certain entity and comes back as an earning. And as rightly have mentioned by Ali also, that next year we are expecting the State Bank's profit to go up to more than 1.5 trillion. From where is it going to come? State Bank is not a production house. It's essentially going to be the same kind of lending, borrowing activity between the governments, where the State Bank is going to charge, then it's going to provide back to the federal government. So that kind of gimmickry is happening. On the other side, despite the claims that the pensions are going to be converted into contributory mechanism and others, the figures are rising. And practically on ground, there is no allocation for that fund. So just making a statement where we're saying that there's going to be a contributory fund and putting no money in the budget means that you were not serious to do that. Now, on the taxes side, as Ali has mentioned, and then followed by Dr. Manzoor, there are plenty of things which are simply mind-grappling, because this is one of the core features of the government's policy, that practically there is no policy. And if there is something, it's going to turn on its seats. For example, there is a mention that this year there's going to be an increase in general sales tax from 15 to 18% for namely two sectors, leather and the garments, textile sector, which were actually fully integrated with the POS system, right from the bottom to the top. So they were good for VAT application. So we were very happy that they were provided with some relief, that if you become integrated, your GST is going to be 15 as compared to the rest of the pack of 18. The government has also increased them to 18%. So where is the benefit of integration? And this is why the Tajar Dost scheme and all other fail, because the people really don't trust the government, that even if they fall trap to it, they're going to be in trouble. And this is what has happened. Withholding tax regime, despite our analysis and repeated requests that this is something which is destroying the whole structure of the businesses, because they can't manage the documentation, they can't manage the FBR's job on their books because it's costly. The FBR has this year further enhanced it to a number of sectors in which there was more undocumented activities going on. So the sectors are practically made responsible for the job which the FBR could have done. So now they have to do the withholding tax irrespective of the type of business they are dealing with. Similarly, on the other side, when we look at the exemptions, still FATA and PATA are given despite the claim that they would be reduced. They are still provided with that. On the PSDB side, as ma'am has rightly mentioned, there is close to 10 trillion rupees worth of throw forward. And 1,200 projects this year are going to be financed. There are going to be 41 ministries and close to 10 state-owned enterprises which are going to benefit with this year's PSDB. So you just calculate in terms of per department billion of rupees, it would turn out to be 1 billion, 2 billion. These are the worth of the projects which are being provided. So how can you imagine the economic engine to run from this? Lastly, when we talk about the provinces, there is another strange story which is referred to as the provincial surplus. Last year, it was 10% of the transfers going from the federal government to the provinces. This year, they have proposed it to be 20%. So just imagine the government saying that we are going to transfer you 5 trillion and they keep back 500 billion. This year, they are saying that we are going to transfer you 7 trillion and they keep back close to 1.5 trillion out of that for no reason. And yet the federal government is also lending to the provincial governments for their development needs and others. So we really don't understand that what this budget was trying to achieve and what are the practical measures through which we can really claim that this is what going to happen. As the days roll forward, then maybe some more details would come out that how and why this ambitious claim of close to 4% of the GDP or the inflation being targeted at 12% could be managed. Because prima facie, what we look from the budget this year, that the inflation is going to increase because the cost of doing business is going to increase, both because of the energy tariffs going up and because of these predatory tax regimes which are going to come into practice. It's good to do document, really good. But the way the FBR is doing, it's only going to increase the cost of doing business for the ones which are already in the system, not for the ones which are outside the system. So that is the fear, that the inflation is not going to be the same what they have targeted, nor the economic growth is going to happen by the same figures which they have mentioned. Thank you.